So we've been having what I feel is a pretty fruitful conversation about what we call, of course, transformative leadership communication. We've now looked at the first three pillars: yes and, question first, and the law of three. Now this next one's going to be a little shorter, and we're not going to have any role plays. There's really no practicing to do here, but we can talk about it. And it's a principle that I call vanguarding. So what is vanguarding? So vanguarding is a historical phrase referencing the Roman army. And so when the Roman army went to battle, the first group that went in was the vanguard group. And they formed a V when they went in. And that was the first group or point that attacked the particular, we'll call it problem in this case. Now, how does this apply to us? Vanguarding understands well that the best cure for any problem is prevention. And so it's knowing what could go wrong and getting in front of it so it's not an issue. So let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. Earlier, I explained how we are going to do role plays. Now, why did I explain that?
Because if you didn't, we wouldn't have done it well.
That's right. If I don't explain that, in other words, if I don't get in front of it and say, here are the ground rules, here's essentially how we're going to do these. We're going to just start talking immediately like we've been talking for 5 minutes. You're not going to say this to me. You're not going to say this to me. You're not going to say, hey, Marcus. No, we're just going to go right into it like we've been talking. So because I made those points, we're able to have very effective role plays quickly. That was a vanguard. Now, we have lots of opportunities to vanguard in business. They manifest themselves in many, many different ways, but generally we don't take advantage of them. Let's look at one quick example. Let's say you have a company meeting, right? Now, oftentimes when we have a company meeting, we want it to go well, but we don't necessarily do anything to set the tone to make sure it goes really, really well. So an example of this would be when you start your meeting, using, of course, question first, you have a vanguard in place, which is, let's say there was a big meeting that we're about to have together today. I might say to you, Randy, so Randy, what's one thing that we need to do in this meeting today? In other words, we need to bring a quality we need to bring so as to make sure we have a very effective, successful experience. Now, you might say to me any number of things. Give me an example of something you might say to me.
We need to be ready to participate.
We've got to be ready to participate. Now, knowing what you have heard so far today, what's my next response? Law of three.
Would you ask him a question on
Law of three.
how would you like to participate today?
Yeah, so one of the easiest ways to remember it is we need to make sure that when somebody gives an answer, we know it's a good answer because you could paint the picture, right?
So you help me paint a picture.
So what does great participation look like to you? And then you're able to say what it looks like, and we're quickly having much better answers.
Yeah.
Somebody else comes back with one. What's another one somebody might say in the group?
Be present and
Be present.
eliminate
Good.
distractions.
You say, as the leader,
Help me understand, what do you mean by present?
yeah, what does presence look like?
Yeah, what does it look like?
Right? What does presence look like? How does presence manifest? And then you say what?
I would eliminate distractions.
Yeah. And then you might come back and say what? Law of three, keep going.
Yeah, so what kind of distractions would we eliminate?
Yes.
I'm going to check my email before and then wait till after to check it again.
And then what other distractions could there be that we should eliminate?
We should have
could you
everybody
there?
turn their phones off.
Right. And then you might finish with, if you do all of those, if we do those things, what impact is it going to have on our meeting?
Yeah.
Aaron's able to say, we're all going to be fully engaged. But that's how we're vanguarding all the issues on the front end. We're starting, though, with question first, because here's what we don't want to do. Here's the rules for our meeting today. There's no question first. There's no self-discovery. You're still vanguarding, but you're the one pontificating at that point. So the vanguard comes with the other principles to make it effective.
So if you're a leader and you're going to have that meeting, do you want to do that vanguarding prior to the meeting, or is it better to have the entire meeting there and have kind of set
Great point.
stage there?
There's many different ways that you vanguard.
Okay.
You might vanguard
In advance.
days leading up to it, right?
And then still
This happens with sales meetings all the time. We actually talked about it yesterday. All that assignment selling, one big fat vanguard. Making sure that they're well educated beforehand. Making sure they already know the answers to the basic questions, right? All that vanguarding, getting in front of issues. Knowing so clearly, here's what the issues are going to be. How do I get in front of them? No different than if you're going to have a one-on-one with somebody and you need to really dress them down. We come right out and we say, I need to talk to you about something very important today. But I want you to know, as we're talking about this, I care about you and I want us to figure this out. But I've noticed some problems. What's the vanguard there?
You care about them.
I care about you.
Gotcha,
We're going to figure this out.
Yeah, because usually people see that as like, if someone's talking to me about something, they don't care. So you're trying to get in front of that.
I'm trying to get in front of that. Recently, I met with one of my primary managers. I came right in the room with my business partner. She knew something was up. She had been underperforming. As soon as we sat down, I said, we're not here to let you go. We're here because we care about you and we need to solve some problems.
Yeah, and she's like instantly she's going to listen versus the whole time worrying about when are they going to
Are you going to let me go?
Yeah.
Because if she's thinking the whole time, are you going to let me go? What does she hear?
Nothing.
Nada.
Yeah.
So me sitting down saying, we're not going to let you go. That's not the purpose of this meeting, but we're going to figure out some solutions to some problems. It says, I care about you. We care about you. And we've eliminated that concern from the fray.
Going to your example of someone disagreeing with you while you're speaking, for example, if I'm going into a
Great
discussion with an idea, I know there's going to be pushback.
Yes.
Would
This
me
is such a
addressing
smart, observant thing.
the criticism beforehand?
And so you do it. That's the key. Is I know, so for those that have watched our course on marketing for today's digital customer, one of the things that we talked about there was addressing cost and price. That keeps coming back up. When I talked about that in that particular course, and again, if you haven't watched it, make sure you do, that thing is chock full of vanguards. An example, and I'm so glad you pointed this out, an example of this is I started that conversation with the question of, so when you're on a website and you can't find any information on cost and price, what is the emotion you experience? And you say frustration. Mm-hmm. And in that moment of frustration, do you sit there and say to yourself, oh, I'm sure it's on this website somewhere? And you're like, no. And I said, in fact, how long would you stay on that website? And you're like, well, probably less than 10 seconds. And in that moment of frustration, do you as the buyer, do you as the searcher, do you say to yourself, well, that's okay, they're a value-based business. I'm going to call them on the phone instead. Do you say that? And you said, no, I don't do that. Instead, you do what? I keep searching until I find what I'm looking for. Every one of those was a vanguard, because here's what I don't want you to say. That doesn't apply to us, Marcus, because our customers just call us. Mm-hmm. So I've gotten rid of the exit strategy. It's gone. It's a vanguard. We've eliminated it from the conversation. And so now we only can focus in on, he's got a point. I wouldn't stay on that site. I wouldn't call the company. I would just keep searching. Yeah. So the vanguard is analyzing your behavior and then saying, so how come you're not talking about cost and price? Because you can't argue with yourself.
Yeah.
You'll argue with me, but not yourself.
So, I talked about there was frustrations within our company when there was an acquisition because there were system changes. So if you're in a company and you know there's going to be system changes, instead of just going to a meeting and rolling them out, potentially it's better to say, we're going to have a meeting to discuss some system changes.
Yes.
And I know that many of you are going to be filling this, and this.
That's right.
And try and kind of address those concerns before you even get in the meeting.
100%. Just like, let's say you're going through a conversation with a customer, a potential customer, and you're at the final stages of winning the bid, closing the deal, whatever you want to call it. One of the best vanguards you can possibly say is, that rarely do people say is, so here's what we don't want to have happen. And then you specifically spell out how they could be a bad client or how you could be a bad vendor.
Fortunately, we actually do this quite a bit.
Good. How
I'm
so?
happy to hear. We've used past experiences where things have gone bad to inform us on what the behaviors of both parties need to be in a successful relationship, and we lay that out beforehand. If we don't, we end up with problems on our hands.
Yeah. How do you say it in a way that's incredibly frank and lands? So how do you do it in a way that gets their attention? So when you're going to have that conversation, what do you say to start it?
We really want this to be successful, obviously, and we've learned some lessons in the past that are important, and we just want to talk about this to make this as successful as possible.
Okay,
so we
I'm
can
gonna
help
stop
you
you
out.
there. You heard how he said it, right? It was fine. They might hear you.
Yeah.
But what if we said this? So let's talk about what would cause this to fail. Now, which one's got your attention?
I mean, that does, because most people aren't willing to be
Pain.
most people aren't willing to be that transparent.
That blunt,
yeah,
that frank.
Like, hey, this could fail, and like, you're like, whoa, hold on, he's talking about
What would cause this to fail?
Yeah.
Now, it's almost everybody says, so here's things we need to do to have success. But oftentimes, the client still doesn't always do their part.
Mm-hmm.
Until you say, so here's what would cause this to fail. Here's what we don't want to have happen. Here's a conversation that we don't want to have in 6 months. All Vanguards.
It's interesting because in construction, they call it the honeymoon phase. The beginning of the project, it's all about how we're going to be successful, like all this flowery language of like how great it's going to be. I feel like if in construction we just did a better job of, hey, we're a committed partner, but we just want to talk about what we need to do so that this doesn't fail.
Mm-hmm.
I think everybody would be like, okay, let's listen to this instead of the flowery language of about how we're all going to get along.
100%.
Yeah.
Anybody that's in construction would appreciate this. Because all of your disclaimers in a construction process are Vanguards. They could be called the same thing. So when we read disclaimers with somebody for a project, for a swimming pool project, and we're talking about concrete, they might read the disclaimer, but then here's the phraseology. You have one guarantee with your concrete. Guess what that guarantee is?
It's going to crack.
It's going to crack. Now, usually they're like, what? It's going to crack. And they're like, ha, ha, ha. And you're like, no, I'm being serious. That's the one guarantee you're going to have. It's going to crack. Now, we can do everything under the sun to prevent that. But I promise you at some point it's going to crack. And so here's what we don't want to have happen. You get a hairline crack in there. We did everything we could. You get a hairline crack. And you say to me,
why did my pool crack?
Why did my pool crack? There's the question first, right? We don't want to have that conversation because we're having it right now. Because you know that crack wasn't a structural crack. That was a hairline crack. Are we on the same page?
Mm-hmm.
That is vanguarding. Manifests itself all day long in leadership and in communication. And so we always want to focus on how could this go wrong? How could they misinterpret, misperceive? What would be their potential exit strategies? Their excuses? How can I eliminate all those things on the front end so as to ensure success? That's vanguarding.